Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to unpack one of the most intense and pivotal constitutional battles in modern history. We're looking at India between the years 1927 and 1929. This was a time when the future of an entire subcontinent was basically hanging in the balance, and the political chess moves made during this really brief window set the stage for absolutely everything that followed.
So you gotta wonder, how did a single British insult in 1927 literally spark India's very first unified attempt to write its own constitution? Because what we're really looking at here is a high-stakes political chess match. Every single action triggered a massive reaction, and what the British intended to secure their imperial power ended up shaking its very foundations.
Let's move to and see how this builds across an incredibly tense couple of years. In 1927, the British appoint the Simon Commission. Instantly, 1928 becomes a year of mass protests and a bold countermove called the Nehru Report. By the end of 1928, we see severe internal fractures with Jinnah's amendments, all culminating in the final, and by then somewhat obsolete, publication of the Simon Report in 1930.
Section 1. The Catalyst, an all-white commission.
To really grasp why 1928 was such a powder keg, we have to look at the spark. On November 8, 1927, the British government appoints the Indian Statutory Commission, headed by Sir John Simon. Their job? Supposedly, to study the progress of governance and decide if India was ready for more constitutional reforms. But there was a glaring, deeply offensive problem. It was an all-white, 7-member commission. Not a single Indian was included to decide the constitutional future of India. And you know what's wild? The timing. This commission wasn't actually due until 1929. So why jump the gun? Well, the Conservative Party was in power in Britain, and they were terrified of losing the upcoming election to the Labour Party. They explicitly said they didn't want to leave their most prized colony in what they called irresponsible Labour hands. Plus, their previous 1919 Act was failing to stabilize their rule. They were dealing with reports of crises in agriculture, recruitment, and the whole diarchy administration. They needed to lock down control fast.
Section 2. The Reaction. Simon go back.
Well, if the British thought rushing this appointment would secure their grip, they completely miscalculated. The reaction across India was unified, immediate, and furious. The exclusion of Indians was seen as a massive violation of self-determination. It was a deliberate insult. And ironically, this British move achieved the impossible. It united political groups that usually didn't see eye to eye. The Congress, the Hindu Mahasabha, and the majority faction of the Muslim League led by Jinnah all agreed to boycott. When the commission landed in Bombay on February 3, 1928, they walked straight into nationwide strikes, hartals, black flags, and crowds roaring the slogan, "Simon go back." It also catapulted a fiery new generation of youth leaders, guys like Jawaharlal Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose, right to the front lines.
But man, this resistance had a heavy cost. The police response was brutal. In October 1928, during an anti-Simon demonstration, the revered leader Lala Lajpat Rai was severely beaten in a police lathi charge. He died from his injuries just a month later. But he left behind this chilling prophetic quote: "The blows which fell on me today are the last nails driven into the coffin of British imperialism." It was a moment of profound tragedy, but it absolutely hardened the nation's resolve.
Section 3. Micro-narrative. Dr. Ambedkar's stand.
Now, right in the middle of this massive nationwide boycott, there's this absolutely fascinating micro-narrative. In October 1928, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who was appointed by the Bombay Legislative Council, went before the Simon Commission, and his demands were incredibly progressive. Get this, he demanded universal adult franchise for both males and females. To put that into perspective, even most countries in Europe hadn't fully guaranteed that yet. He also argued for provincial autonomy, diarchy at the center, and crucially, that the depressed classes be treated as a distinct independent minority. The commission basically gave a highly inadequate response to his brilliant proposals, but Ambedkar was already laying the intellectual groundwork for India's future democracy.
Section 4. The countermove. The Nehru Report.
Meanwhile, the British Secretary of State, Lord Birkenhead, decided to arrogantly challenge Indian politicians, claiming they were entirely incapable of producing an agreed-upon constitution themselves. Well, the Indian leadership accepted that challenge. In February 1928, an all-parties conference appointed a committee chaired by Motilal Nehru to draft a constitution. This was unprecedented. It was the first major attempt by Indians to assert their right to self-determination by actually sitting down and writing the constitutional framework for their own country.
By August 1928, the report was finalized. So the crucial point is, what kind of government did they actually ask for? The majority of the committee favored dominion status, meaning a self-governing nation that still remains within the British Commonwealth. But this specific choice caused a massive internal rift. The radical youth wing, led by Jawaharlal Nehru and Bose, were deeply frustrated. They didn't want to be a dominion. They demanded complete, absolute independence.
And this brilliantly illustrates the stark contrast in visions for India's future. When we compare the British Simon Commission's eventual recommendations against the Indian Nehru Report, it's night and day. The Simon Commission rejected universal franchise and insisted on retaining separate communal electorates. The Nehru Report, on the other hand, pushed for joint electorates, the creation of linguistic provinces, and a guaranteed set of 19 fundamental rights. It was a completely modern, forward-looking democratic vision.
Section 5. The fracture. Communal clashes.
Now, drafting a constitution for a diverse subcontinent is an incredibly delicate balancing act. And tragically, the Nehru Report began to unravel along deep communal fault lines. To maintain unity, the Nehru Committee made several concessions to the Hindu Mahasabha. The Mahasabha strongly opposed creating new Muslim-majority provinces or reserving seats for majorities in places like Punjab and Bengal. So the Nehru Report conceded by proposing a broadly unitary political structure where residual powers rested with the center, not the provinces. They also delayed the separation of Sindh from Bombay. While this appeased one side, it deeply alienated Muslim leaders.
This friction totally boiled over at the All-Parties Conference in Calcutta in December 1928. The political tug-of-war is really stark when you map it out. The Nehru Report proposed proportionate reservation for Muslims in the central legislature. Jinnah demanded a strict one-third representation. The Nehru Report kept residual powers at the center. Jinnah demanded they go to the provinces to ensure Muslim-majority areas had autonomy. The Nehru Report insisted on joint electorates. Jinnah firmly demanded separate electorates. The gap between the two visions was just too wide to bridge.
Section 6. A fractured conclusion.
So we reached the climax of this intense historical chapter. The attempt to forge a unified Indian constitutional response ultimately fractured. Jinnah's proposed amendments were flatly rejected, which led him to outline his famous 14 points. The Nehru Report was ultimately found unsatisfactory and rejected by the Muslim League, the Hindu Mahasabha, and Sikh communalists. And it wasn't even just the communal divisions. The younger section of the Congress was so furious over the compromise of dominion status that Jawaharlal Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose rejected their own party's goal and formed the Independence for India League. The incredible unity we saw forged against the Simon Commission had entirely dissolved.
Which leaves us with his final, powerful question to think about. Yes, the Nehru Report failed to unite Indian political factions in 1928. It definitely ended in fracture. But look at what it demanded: fundamental rights, linguistic provinces, and a vision of universal franchise championed by leaders like Ambedkar. Did these supposed failures of 1928 actually plant the seeds and quietly write the very first draft of the modern Indian Republic that would emerge 2 decades later? It's a fascinating thought to leave you with. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history that shapes our world today.